Alrighty, so today I'm going to be doing the review of the trip, and I'm going to be going over a lot of the things that I've learned over the past 3,000 miles on this trip from Washington to Georgia. And so we're going to start off this video with the number one most requested question that everybody seems to be having is the Honda's transmission fluid temperature. How hot does it get? How often does it get hot? Is it something to be worried about, concerned about? And so we're going to jump right into that. So Honda's parameters in the manual state that if you're going to be towing a camper trailer, that you should maintain between 55 to 62 miles per hour. They say it has to deal with the way that the trailer will sway, but there's also potential that as you get faster, there's a lot more wind resistance, and a big trailer, especially like mine, it was probably like 3 feet taller than my truck. That's creating a lot of not only drag, but also the truck has to work that much harder to push through that wind, so which could load up the transmission much more, make it work harder. So these are things that you just have to consider, and the ground rules for the Honda Ridgeline that we're going to go base off of. Alrighty, so I want to start off this video with saying that I didn't document the transmission temperature throughout the whole entire duration of this trip. However, before I took the trip, I set myself some parameters, and with the use of the Scan Gauge 2, with the data that I was getting for the transmission fluid temperature, I believe that these were very important factors that ensured that the vehicle was going with the least amount of load as possible, and that it actually probably was the main reason why I never received a Honda error code saying that the truck overheated. And so these are very important things that if you're going to be doing a long trip like this, I would recommend that you set yourself some sort of parameter. That way you would ensure and protect your vehicle as best as you possibly can. I also want to mention that I did use the cruise control for a big majority of the trip, right up until about the second time that I received or that I saw a spike in the transmission temperature up to about 160 degrees, I think the second time. And from that moment on, I think we were in Kansas at that point, I did the rest of the trip, so that's about half the trip I did with the cruise control, and then half the trip I did just with controlling the pedal the whole entire time. A lot more work, but I think as we get deeper into this transmission temperature, you guys can make some decisions on your own if it's a necessity or if you have to actually physically use your pedal the whole entire trip. For 3,000 miles, that's a really long trip to do, so I don't think you need it for the whole entire duration, but at least to set the ground rules for what I had when I was driving. I want to give a special thanks to my friend Kevin. Before I started my trip, we were communicating, and he sent me a diagram containing information about dangerous transmission temperatures and the potential degradation and transmission failure points from excessive temperature exposure. So after looking at that graph, I had to give myself an internal temperature alarm that anything from 230 degrees up to 259, I consider that a really high temperature, and that I needed to pull over and let the truck cool off. But anything after 260 and above, that was like immediate. I need to stop right now, that the truck is going to start seeing some significant damage to the transmission. As we got further into the trip, though, this parameter had to slightly be modified, because the reality is, as you're driving 3,000 miles, there are spots that you just can't stop, because there's really aggressive hill ascending that you have to do. So in those kind of places, you're just going to have to push through, and you're going to experience some short bursts of higher temperatures, but after you ascend and then you start going back down, you could potentially recover that temperature and cool it off. So as we went into the trip, that did have to happen, and that's something that I just had to make just a decision that that's what I want to do with my truck. Obviously, you guys can do whatever you need with your truck, but for the trip, because I didn't want to take forever and stop every single time the truck hit 230 degrees, but for us, it was important to make it on time and do it as safely as possible. So with these parameters in place, I think that's very important to have that mindset already set, so that you guys are ready to pull over if you need to, or just monitor the truck and say, hey, we're getting hot, we need to slow down, we need to potentially, ease off the throttle, or whatever you guys need to do to ensure that the truck doesn't overheat. So that first overheating issue that we experienced in Kansas, that happened to roughly around 1,530 miles into the trip. So we had a really long and difficult journey ahead up until this point, and the truck didn't experience anything that I would consider dangerous. And again, we did stop a couple times to ensure that the truck never overheated. So I did my due diligence to ensure and protect the transmission as much as possible. But again, I also did have almost 5,000 pounds that I was towing, which is going to be a lot more than most people are going to be towing, unless if you get a camper. Campers, they could easily be around 4,000 pounds dry. So people are probably going to be experiencing some heavy towing with this. But if you're just using this just to tow around some like recreational vehicles like an ATV, jet skis and stuff like that, maybe a small boat, you probably won't be seeing these higher weights, and probably not going to experience these high temperatures with the Honda Ridgeline. But again, about 1,500 miles into the trip is when we first started seeing these higher temperature issues, and which led us into the next about maybe another 100 miles, we experienced our second high temperature increase. So that second time when we had to pull over in Kansas, the temperature started at 260 degrees, I believe, and it was getting as high as 270 before we stopped. And that leads me into my next subject, which is the cruise control. As I mentioned earlier, I use the cruise control for the majority of the trip, and there are people out there probably who would say and shun using cruise control when you're towing something very large, but I did some research and I didn't see that as a big issue for towing. Not saying that that is the correct way of towing, but when I use this Honda Ridgeline, I got to know the Honda Ridgeline's capabilities pretty well, especially up at the 1,500 mile mark, of what it was capable of doing. How did the truck feel with this load? And so from what I experienced and the feedback that I got from the truck was that it's definitely capable for towing 5,000 pounds comfortably. Honestly, I think you could probably do a lot more, especially for short periods of distances, but I'm not going to recommend or say that you should do it. However, if I needed to in a pinch and I needed to pull something 6,000 pounds, I probably wouldn't even sweat about it. I would definitely be confident that the truck could definitely tow a larger and heavier weight than 5,000 pounds. But that being said, the cruise control is something that we were using. It definitely made the trip much more bearable. I can't imagine having to use the pedal for 3,000 miles, especially a lot of the places that we were driving were pretty flat. So if I had to maintain the pedal the whole entire time, I just would have been extremely exhausting. My recommendation is it's safe to use, but it is very important that you maintain and watch your transmission temperature, because I think this is where we got in trouble with the transmission overheating, especially the second time. So the second time when the transmission started to peak at the 260 to 270 range, what I noticed with that portion of the trip was we were actually going through very many hills. So the reason to why it was overheating is because the cruise control is set to a specific speed. It's trying to maintain and keep that speed regardless of the hill or the environment. And so as you're constantly doing these continuous hills up and down, as you ascend, it starts to rev really high to maintain that, say, keep it at 70 miles per hour. And once you get over the crest, it'll still maintain that 70, and you'd get up, it'd struggle and try and maintain that 70 miles per hour. And sometimes it would go a little bit slower, 68, 67, trying just to adjust to that weight. And then you'd have the higher rev, it'd rev up to 6,000 RPMs to just to quickly catch up to 70. And so it was doing this continuously for miles. And I think because I didn't pay attention to the transmission at that time, what was probably happening was every single time we hit a hill, it would go up a degree, come down, not have enough time to cool off, hit that second hill, go up another degree, and so on and so forth. And so it was just slowly over time and over distance, it was heating up the transmission without ever giving it a chance to rest. So especially in these kind of situations, if you're going to see a lot of hills and they're never going to end, I highly recommend take off the cruise control, because I think that was definitely the leading factor why the Honda's transmission started to overheat the second time. It's almost pretty much self-explanatory in that, because when I got off and I was actually using my pedal and controlling the speed for the remaining portion of it, I was able to maintain it under 230 degrees and basically speed up a little bit, but without increasing your revs as you're coming down the hill, preparing for the next ascent. And then as you hit that second ascent, you might go a little bit faster and slowly ease off of the gas as you're climbing up. That way the engine never starts to rev more, and it just maintains a even and steady RPM throughout the entire duration of that ascent. At least that's what I was doing, and that was helping maintain a lower transmission temperature for the duration of my trip. After that, I never experienced anything hot. I never went over 230 degrees when I was maintaining and controlling the pedal myself. I think there was actually one time in Tennessee, they have this, like, I don't know what it was called, this really steep hill where they actually had like runoffs for the trucks in the event that their brakes fail. So it was extremely steep to ascend that and then coming back down. So I think that was the only time I think I may have hit like 235. But even then I wasn't seeing extremely high temperatures. So cruise control on the Honda Ridgeline, if you're going to be towing large weight, I would recommend that if you see that the road's going to be pretty easy and steady, just flat, have at it, use the cruise control. But if you start seeing that, hey, there's going to be either a lot of hills or it's going to be very bumpy and wavy on the road, you may want to consider taking off your cruise control and actually controlling that yourself, because the transmission and the cruise control, they're not talking well enough with each other. All the cruise control wants to do is maintain that speed that you've set for it, and the transmission's like, okay, let's go for it. And so my recommendation is use the cruise control just on flat plains, but when you're going into hilly areas, you're gonna have to take off the cruise control and just maintain and control it as best as you can with the pedal. So which leads me into part 3, which is the fuel economy for this trip. This trip was a massive 2,778.9 miles, and the truck, the Honda computer was averaging that we get 13.953 miles per gallon. But when I actually did the math and I added everything up, the actual fuel efficiency was 11.755, which is a loss of 2.208 miles per gallon. And that's a pretty big difference between what Honda's saying and what you're actually getting. So if you guys are driving your Honda and you guys see like 30 miles per gallon, you're actually getting about 28 miles per gallon or slightly less. So that's just something for you guys to consider, that don't take the word for what's actually coming out of the screen, but you have to do the math. And on my Honda, everybody's Honda might be a little bit different, but I'm averaging about 2 miles per gallon less than what the actual Honda mile per gallon is estimating. Now, somebody was asking about what the confidence I have with the Honda Ridgeline is, and I'm going to say that before I started this trip, that my confidence in the Honda Ridgeline was very low, because I remember when I first started working with this, I was doing a house project and I had like a 3,000-pound trailer that I pulled, and I was going uphill. I used the D4. It was screaming. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was just getting used to towing, so I kind of was like just put on edge. And there wasn't a lot of information out there on YouTube about the Honda Ridgeline and towing, so I wasn't extremely confident. But after doing this trip, my confidence now in the Honda Ridgeline is 100%. As long as you're within the parameters of what the Honda is capable of doing. The 5,000 pounds, yeah, it's gonna be no problem. I'm not worried about it. Long trips, yes, I would be concerned if I did not have a scan gauge, but if you're not gonna be going far and you're gonna be doing local trips, you're gonna be just fine with this Honda. It's gonna do everything that you possibly are gonna need for the average individual. I mean, obviously, if you're working on a job site and you gotta tow like bobcats and stuff like that, this is probably not the truck that you want to be doing it with. But for the average person, you're gonna go get some boxes from Home Depot, some lumber, it's gonna be just fine. So confidence in the Honda Ridgeline, extremely high, and I definitely highly recommend this truck for anybody who just wants to get something, just a truck for the house that you can do all your stuff, but at the same time still be able to take the family out and you know, be comfortable. Alrighty, so now we're gonna go ahead and talk about speed. So I maintained originally 55 miles per hour from the beginning of my trip. I gradually increased that incrementally all the way to 62, to the maximum that Honda recommended. And then as time was progressing, kind of wanted to get home faster, so I decided to push it further. And I had a maximum speed of 82 miles per hour, and that's because the tire rating on my trailer caps at 82, so I didn't want to go any faster than that. The truck handled really well under all circumstances. Now, people are probably going to say that it's not good to do that and stay underneath the 62 mile per hour range that Honda recommends. The speed limit says 70, 80 miles an hour in some areas, so I decided that I was just going to test it out and see how the Honda did. And the Honda honestly performed extremely well with a loaded truck. that actually shocked me because it didn't budge. It just went like a bullet. Obviously, when we had some side winds in Colorado and Kansas, there were some times where it got a little shaky at those speeds, but for the majority of the trip, honestly, going 80 miles an hour with 5,000 pounds, I didn't even sweat it. I was extremely confident with the truck. The truck handled very well and was capable at those speeds. So if you guys are gonna be driving and you guys wanna go faster than 62, I personally think that it's okay to drive quicker than 62. Honda recommends 62 as the maximum. So if you're worried about you know, warranty or anything like that, maybe maintain and stay underneath 62 miles an hour. But it drove well. I didn't have any issues for how the car reacted under that speed of 82 miles an hour. So that's something that I'll say about the speed. And the more that I drove this truck, the more I fell in love with it, and the more I was just shocked at its capabilities, that Honda did so well designing this truck. It is such a good truck. Now let's talk about towing. The Honda is capable of towing up to 5,000 pounds, and I had it at almost 5,000 pounds. And I'll tell you that I think it's capable of more than that. But for safety reasons, 5,000 is all I'm gonna recommend for anybody to drive. I just feel confident with this truck. That's how much it's impressed me with its capabilities. However, if you're towing something, because I had a brake controller that was working with my brakes, I don't know how it's going to be with a trailer that isn't connected via brake controller, because when I'm braking, the trailer is braking, and so I don't feel any extra shifting of the weight or anything pushing the truck. So I can't comment on that, but with a trailer that has assisted brakes, you don't really feel it. When you're coming downhill, like a big steep hill, that's probably the time that you're gonna be the most on edge with this truck, just because that's a lot of weight coming down. But it tows well. So when you're starting off like at a red light and you're getting ready to move, 5,000 pounds, it doesn't feel that weight when it starts. It just goes. And that was very impressive for me from this V6. So again, capable truck, and towing capabilities are going to be sufficient for, I think, most people's requirements. Alrighty, so I have had requests on what items do I recommend for the trip, and these are the 3 things that I think are very important to have if you're going to be towing with the Honda Ridgeline, and also if you're going to be towing with another individual. So starting off, the most important thing, regardless of what year you have, 2017 all the way to 2020, is the Scan Gauge 2. This obviously, as I've been speaking about it frequently, this is what's going to tell you your transmission fluid temperature and any other readings that you may be interested in. So this is the most important tool to have with your Honda Ridgeline, regardless if you're towing or not. I think that this is extremely important to have, because it's not good just for towing. Some people are really anal about like miles per gallon and trying to get really good fuel economy. So it has some stuff in there for those kind of individuals. But you could also do codes and stuff like that. So if you had a error code and you want to see what it is, you can go ahead and erase it and or find out exactly what it is. So that is a very convenient tool to have just in your glove box. I mean, it's super easy to install, and there's nothing that you need to do fancy. So highly recommend the Scan Gauge 2. So moving on, I personally went with the Kurt Echo Mobile Brake Controller. I will be doing a video on this, how this works with the trailer, and the reason why I went with this over all the others was because I didn't want to go ahead and start going underneath the dashboard and potentially just drilling some holes into the plastic. I wanted something that was super easy, super plug and play, because I can go from my truck and I can put it right into the Subaru, and if I'm going to tow with the Subaru and go back to the truck, and all I have to do is just program 2 different vehicles, and that way it's super easy and it's portable, and if somebody else has something they needed to use it with, I can just let family and friends use it. So this is better, in my opinion. It is much more expensive than something that just goes and plugs in into your OBD2 port, or actually it's not the OBD2 port, there's actually a little different device. They have a wiring harness specifically for this, but I think for what you're getting for convenience, this is superior than that, because a lot of the stuff requires you to screw it in, or you could tape it on, you know, whichever way you want to go. But I feel that's tacky. This way, it's super sleek, it's stealthy, and you can't even notice it. So this is the second and most important tool that I think that you need to have. Obviously, any kind of brake controller. If you have a trailer that has brakes, obviously. So this is not going to work for all trailers. This only works for trailers that have brakes built in. So this is number 2 that I do recommend that you have. And then obviously number 3, this is kind of just because if you are going to be driving around in the wilderness and stuff like that, and you have a second individual, like my brother-in-law was driving the Subaru, you're going to go into a place that has no service. And when you have no service, well, how are you going to contact them? You don't want to pull over just to have a word. So he recommended that I get this, and honestly, this was probably one of the greatest things that we had for this trip. So if you guys are going to be doing any towing, any kind of driving with another individual in a separate car, and you happen or plan on going into the mountains with this, highly recommend getting yourself a walkie-talkie or two-way radio, however they're called, two-way radio. And this one says it's good for 32 miles. I'm actually really curious, and I do want to test that out, so I might make a video just on this as well. But these are the 3 things that I recommend that if you're going to be towing, you need to have. Obviously, again, most important, have the scan gauge 2. If you have a trailer with brakes, I personally like this Kurt Echo Mobile. And for convenience, just to save yourself a lot of headache, get yourself a device to be able to speak with, you know, multiple parties without having to pull over. So those are my recommendations, and if there's anything else, I'll just leave it down in the comments. Now let's talk about comfort and features that the Honda Ridgeline has that makes towing and driving it so much better. So you have the adaptive cruise control, you have lane keep assist, and these 2 features alone make a big world of difference when you're towing, especially for long periods of trips, because you can somewhat relax and not have to be under a lot of stress and worry about the pedal the whole entire time. So it's very well equipped. The seats are comfortable. They do, for what I would consider this vehicle a touring vehicle, you still do get very tired after driving long periods of time. Like I said earlier, the back support on the Honda Ridgelines could be improved a little bit. That was probably my only negative for the drive, was that I wish it had a little bit more support for my lumbar. But other than that, it sits well. I really like that these armrests, there we go, are extremely comfortable, and that the door is also padded as well. These are 2 things that are convenient, because this is the main position that you're driving in. Is obviously, you can see lots of wear here, and so having that good cushion on both sides, and it's well placed, that for long periods of trips you're not going to get fatigued keeping your elbows in that position. So I think Honda's infotainment system is really good. I personally like, everyone hates that there's no dial here. I love that they don't have a dial here, and I am actually really disappointed that they put a dial back moving forward. I don't know why. I like technology and I like to move forward, and I think putting that dial there and people just not getting used to it, in my opinion, I guess it's just hindering Honda from going further and just improving. So I think they should have just stayed with it and just worked to get it better, because I don't even think like the Teslas have dials. I think everything's just on the button, and I don't hear people complaining about that. So I don't know. I think that's just something that Honda should have just kept and just perfected it, because you can only get better if you continue doing it over and over. So that's just my opinion there. But the Honda Ridgeline is extremely comfortable inside, and it's beautiful. It's such a good looking interior. I love this truck. This is a truck that I can confidently say and recommend to people that if you're looking for a truck because you just want to have a vehicle that does everything, this is the perfect vehicle for most people. So that's just my opinion. I know some people may not agree with that, but I really like this truck. I used to drive Toyota Tacomas. I was a Toyota Tacoma guy, and no one could break me from that. I like the capabilities, the locking differential, going off-road, but this is what I bought now. I was originally going to buy a Gen 3 Toyota Tacoma. I was ready to buy it, went to the dealer, and I was like, you know what, before I buy it, let me go test drive all the other vehicles that are available out there. do I really need a Toyota Tacoma? That's all I've been driving for a long period of time. So I decided, hey, I'm gonna go ahead, test out all the trucks in this segment. And once I got to the Honda Ridgeline, I fell in love, and I don't regret ever buying this truck. I had 2015 Toyota Tacoma right before this one, obviously by far better. And if you guys seen some of my other videos, you see that my dad has a 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma off-road. It's a 2018 with every feature. So I drove that before I moved here a couple of times, and honestly I could say that again, I made the right decision with the Honda Ridgeline for my needs. And I think that if you are in the market to buy a Honda Ridgeline or buy a Toyota Tacoma, drive them both and look at them with an open mind, not with this BS where it's like it's not a real truck. Drive it as if you had to do this for a long period of time and you didn't have to use this for towing and hauling. Drive it like a regular vehicle, because I would assume 90% or more of everyone's commute is going to be just driving without any weight. So again, my opinion on the truck, you guys can take it for what it's worth, but I love the truck and it's such a good investment. So just for fun, I wanted to find out what my mile per gallon loss was per pound of weight, and so I created this fuel mile per gallon loss calculation. Now, this could be a nice tool you can use to get an idea of what kind of fuel economy you guys can expect when towing if you know your weight. However, I don't know how equally it will relate to everyone's Hondas, so you can just use this as a reference and not as a guarantee. I estimated that my average fuel economy is roughly 20 miles per gallon, and so for a 4,800 pound load, I lost about 17 thousandths of a miles per gallon per pound of weight. So loading the truck with 582.17 pounds, that would equate to a loss of 1 miles per gallon. So again, thought this was a cool piece of information that you guys can potentially use to get an idea of what kind of mile per gallon you could expect for your next towing trip. Alrighty everyone, so that's going to be a wrap on the 3,000 mile video and all the capabilities of the Honda Ridgeline that I can come up with, at least as of right now. If there's anything, I'll leave it down in the description down below. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this. Thank you guys for watching.